The last unanswered question at the Democratic Convention was answered today. Senator George McGovern's choice for the vice presidential nomination was announced at McGovern headquarters. He is Senator Thomas Eagleton of Missouri.
Eagleton made a fast rise in the world of politics. He served in a variety of state offices in Missouri before coming to the Senate in '68.
According to the National Institute of Mental Health, some 3 million Americans undergo some kind of psychiatric treatment every year. Today, with George McGovern at his side, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, Senator Eagleton, revealed that in the 1960s, he was one of them.
On 3 occasions in my life, I have voluntarily gone into hospitals as a result of nervous exhaustion and fatigue.
Can you tell us what type of psychiatric treatment you received during these periods of counseling from the psychiatrist, including electric shock? Any drug treatment? Sleeping pills?
Eagleton said he had not disclosed the full extent of his health history to McGovern before accepting the offer to be on the ticket.
Then he asked this question. He said, "Tom, do you have any skeletons rattling around in your closet?" I answered that question cogently, directly, and the word is no. That's the word I used. If that question were asked of me today, that same question, the word is no, because I did not consider the fact that I had some hospitalization for a health problem to be a skeleton. What's a skeleton to Eagleton? A skeleton is something that's dirty, filthy, corrupt, illegal, sinister. There's nothing about being fatigued and exhausted and being in a state of mild depression that I find sinister, dirty, or ugly. Tomorrow morning, I will write to the chairman of the Democratic Party withdrawing my candidacy.
At his press conference, Eagleton maintained that although his health is not an issue, withdrawal is the only way forward for the Democratic Party.
As I said last night, it's the same thing as today. My spirits are high. The world will go on, and so will I.
My name is Meg Hutchinson. I am a singer and a songwriter. I've been living with mental illness since I was a teenager, but it took me nearly a decade to realize it. Looking back, my childhood was a happy one. I was very close to my 2 sisters. I grew up in the country, and my memories are filled with nature. We never owned a television, but we had a forest in our backyard. My sisters and I spent hours every day wandering the woods, riding bikes along the dirt roads, and swimming in the Green River. I knew I wanted to be a folk singer by the time I was 8.
Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, a thatchwork of fields, a flock of white birds tossed into the sky.
That dream came true. I recorded albums, I traveled around the country, I won awards for my music.
Days stacked upon days, thunder in the winter.
I was 19 years old when I experienced my first major depression. I didn't understand the symptoms and was too ashamed to ask for help. For 9 more years, I wrestled with reoccurring episodes. The highs got higher, while the depressions got even worse. But I kept it all hidden. In 2006, I went on a whirlwind music tour in England, traveling with several other bands. We drank and partied every night. I was euphoric with boundless energy. I barely slept. It seemed like everything was coming to fruition. I felt like a rock star. I was higher than I'd ever been. When I returned home, things quickly spiraled out of control. I was exhausted, but just couldn't sleep. I kept getting lost driving in my own neighborhood. I couldn't remember how the knobs on the washing machine worked. A fog was creeping over my brain. As I became more frightened, my brain began to race in tight loops of anxiety. The same lines of poetry were racing through my head over and over. I was terrified. I meet my shadow in the deepest all this resembled by the loss of reason. Burned, the eye begins to see us. I meet my shadow all this I had arrived at a point where I could no longer hide my illness. Shame and lack of education about mental illness almost killed me.
Bugs out on the water, making the black rain. Leaves on every tree, once again turning. Summer's past.
In the years since, I've become a mental health advocate and speaker. It's my deepest hope in sharing my own story that I can prevent some other young person from struggling privately in their own lives. I think it's very easy for us to assume when we're experiencing it that it's some kind of character weakness, some kind of moral failing. These illnesses cut our self-esteem to the very core. What I want to remind all of us, especially young people, is that these are illnesses of the brain. They are not something we've created. They're not something we should blame ourselves for, and they're treatable. It's been many years since I first began my struggle with manic depression. Like millions of others who deal every day with various forms of mood disorders, I survived. I survived because I finally got proper treatment, responded well to medication, and made crucial lifestyle changes that have made it possible for me to lead a productive life. But it hasn't been easy. During that first breakdown, it took all the courage I had to call my mom and admit that something was wrong with me.
Don't let the darkness in, don't let the darkness in.
My parents were former hippies. My sisters and I were raised on co-op food and homeopathic medicine. We weren't even vaccinated as kids. In my family, if you felt a little blue, you wrote a poem or went on a nature walk. People in our family weren't supposed to need therapy. We thought willpower could overcome depression. My dad has a profound love of the natural world. He has taught courses on Herman Melville and Henry David Thoreau, whose book Walden tells the story of what we can learn by bringing our lives into harmony with nature.
You know, kids used to tease me about Walden Pond and studying Thoreau and all of that.
Well,
so
I didn't really know what it was all about. I knew that you spent a lot of time in the woods behind our house. We teased you. Remember, you'd always slow down and want to pick blueberries when we were hiking and all these things. We just made fun of you, but come to find out, I think that was certainly creating a climate that we were growing up in where nature was deeply valued. I remember that day before I went to the hospital when this is 7 years ago, and I was in the the thick of it, and you didn't quite grasp how bad it was.
No, I didn't believe how trapped inside yourself you were.
You did come over. I was on the back porch at Mom's.
You weren't like freaking out. It's sort of like you were just
very
you were just so withdrawn.
That's what took me so long to get help, is that I'm really quiet by nature, you know.
But I had this faith that if I could just take you on a walk. Remember, I took you on that walk,
to see your
and we went walking on that country road, and there was a blue heron standing off in the distance on this pond. I said, "Look at that blue heron."
Give me your binoculars.
And you had always been so filled with wonder, you know, about things, and you just couldn't connect. You couldn't reach out beyond yourself to
That's where I
that.
knew that I was really in trouble, because the things that had resonated I couldn't connect with them.
Dad naturally assumed I was having some kind of existential crisis, so he wrote a poem for me. I remember reading it at the time and feeling nothing at all. He shared it with me again on a recent visit to Walden Pond.
I would write a poem for your heart, cradle it in song, teach it the tender sadness of the leaves on hot summer days, the joy of the grass following a storm. Show it how at the edge of the field the stream swells and subsides, the water never still, even when our eyes deceive us into belief. Come, wade in, feel the coolness wash your skin, condense around your bones. Upstream, glittering in the light, riffles break over rocks, merge into the current. Everything changes, but nothing is lost. Light comes and goes, water ebbs and flows. Overhead, the sky holds us fast, some days gray, some days faded blue, some days traced by clouds, white and sailing. But always deep within its vault, stars shine and planets revolve. We have little say in their affairs, but at night we look up, imagine their light reflected in the water, in the cells of the leaves, in the blood pulsing at our wrists, in the grainy earth on which we stand, holding fast to this tilted planet as it spins through its days from season to season, noting how it returns us always to the places we have known, places where nothing is different, but everything has changed.
What's amazing is that when I read it 8 years ago, I couldn't feel it.
I know.
I thought, oh, this is probably a nice poem, but what you don't realize is that your whole ability to feel love gets blocked, which is part of what's so dangerous about it. And I haven't revisited it. And now it's, you know, the words go straight into my heart. And it reminds me of how that is so blocked when you're depressed, which is why we have a hard time saving each other.
Right.
Because all of the methods we use aren't getting picked up by the receiver.
Yeah.
You know?
I know your mother and I thought we could save you just through love, that if we just loved you enough, if we wrote you poems that would somehow free you from what was happening, but it wasn't enough.
Fortunately, my younger sister Tessa had just started a master's program in social work. After days of the family rallying to help me, to no avail, she and our older sister Sarah knew that it was time to take me to the hospital. On the first visit, I checked myself into the psychiatric unit willingly. 1 week later, after I had been released and was being cared for by my family, I had a frightening break with reality. That time, Tessa had me committed to the hospital against my will.
It's so interesting to be 7 years out from the time I spent in that building and to actually not feel terror anymore. For a long time when I drove by here, I'd have this feeling of adrenaline, and just it takes a long time for that pain to start going away.
I still look at the window, that window, when I come this direction. I look at the middle window. That night, the first night that you were there, and when I came back up to see you after we'd made you go in, I came back up to see you and you said, "You came to see me."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, of course I came to see you. I told you I was coming to see you." You said, "I didn't know you were going to come back."
I thought you'd given up on me, because that, you know, I was talking about it the other day with Dad, how, like, I couldn't feel love. So It's like the love channel was broken, and I didn't actually think, I thought you guys had kind of given up that, and really it was just like half an hour later that you had come back in.
I think the day that you were committed was the day that I've felt like I loved you more fiercely than I've ever loved you. It wasn't like a calm or a human love that I was feeling. It was like this animal protectiveness.
I think back about it, and now I feel like the most loving thing you've ever done was to know when you needed to put me into the hospital against my own judgment or will that day.
The doctors diagnosed me with bipolar I disorder, and I began medication. You'd think I would have been relieved to finally know what I had been struggling with all those years and to start a course of treatment. Instead, I was horrified.
It was really the sense of like, I'm bringing the family down by being in here. And I had this massive sense of failure and this kind of grandiose sense that everyone in town would know. And we had no model for it. I mean, we didn't know other people like us that had really been going through that and had a good outcome.
It took multiple tries, and I think that's the other thing that it's so important to remember, that it wasn't this one fix. It wasn't that one miraculous day. It took time.
Don't let the darkness in, don't let the darkness in, oh November. Don't let the darkness in, don't let the darkness in, oh remember.
Like Dad, my mom didn't understand my illness at first either. I'd been such a peaceful, happy kid. She used to call me Buddha baby. She felt sure she could help pull me through with positive thinking and, of course, poetry.
Yes, darling, it's always there, the darkness dropping away beneath our safety nets. You're not crazy when you see it. You'd just be mad to let go, to plummet. First, get some sleep. Next, find one golden thread. It won't support you, but you'll distract yourself in looking. Where there is one thread, there are always others. Now braid what you have into a rope to shinny up. Watch while golden threads weave beneath you the familiar fabric. Breathe deeply now. Begin again to sing.
Were you in denial then during that summer, you feel?
No, I wasn't, because I couldn't help but, I mean, I was so in tune with you that I knew you were hurting, but I didn't know how to take care of myself and take care of you.
You've been able to help me through illnesses for 28 years when there's something wrong, but here suddenly we have an illness in the family that the instinct as a parent is to help, but when was the moment where you realized this was beyond our abilities or beyond your ability to fix the situation?
I didn't understand mental illness. It did not occur to me. And what you said to us when you were ill, in that you thought we would be ashamed and that the world would be better off without you, changed my whole view. I thought, I just didn't get it. I mean, I never knew any mentally ill people. I knew some depressed people, but I thought, you know, they could get over it.
What was the moment where you realized I couldn't get over it in my old ways?
Well, part of it was when you had that psychotic break and you were saying you couldn't follow a thought and they were breaking up. That really got to me, because I thought, how can you lean toward positivity as a healer if you can't control your thoughts? If they're just thinking you, if they're just broken at the ends and frayed, you can't, there's no way that you can heal yourself simply then.
During my breakdown, my sister Tess gave me books by Dr. K. Redfield Jamison, one of the leading authorities on mood disorders. At the time, I couldn't focus enough to read, but I carried her books around the hospital. She's been a profound source of inspiration and a mentor to me ever since.
People assume they know what depression is. They think, oh, I've been through a divorce, I've lost someone. For those of us who have lived with depression, it's very different. How do you describe the difference between depression and grief or sadness?
It's all the difference in the world, because I think with sadness, you feel alive. With depression, so much of you feels, in addition to feeling hopeless, just dead, inert, indifferent, lacking in energy and caring and passion, and everything that makes you human, you lack when you're depressed. I think sadness and grief are very human emotions that people can relate to, that if you're sad, there's usually good cause for it. There's something that's happened in your world that's made you sad. Likewise with grief, you've lost something or someone. But with depression, it just is unrelated. It's just there, and it's this deadness and this emptiness and this dread and the sense of, why wake up? What's the point? I can't love, I can't think. Why?
With bipolar, these periods of depression are offset by periods of mania or hypomania. These highs can bring tremendous energy, enthusiasm, and often creativity. When I was high, I had an ecstatic feeling of connection to everything and everyone.
For me, there were transcendent spiritual blisses that I felt that later I thought, is that not real?
I always tell patients who are reluctant to give up the highs because they don't want to part with those experiences, you don't lose those experiences. They're part of who you are. You can draw upon them. But if you keep having them, you're going to destroy your life, you're going to destroy your brain, you're going to destroy everything that means anything to you.
Dr. Jameson also began her struggle with manic depression in her teens.
I had a major breakdown. I'd been sailing quite high, and then I just crashed, and I had never been sick or distressed a day of my life. I'd always been kind of, hail fellow, well met, never met a stranger, captain of all my teams, couldn't wait to bounce out of bed in the morning to see what was, the day was going to hold, and never thought of suicide or death. And I was thinking about nothing else for months. Everything was just dark and grim. And the odd thing is how much you can hide that. As I know you are well aware, you can hide an extraordinary amount of suffering if you make the decision to do so.
Shame and fear are common aspects of mental illness. So I was really inspired when I traveled to Washington to meet with Scott Stossel. Scott, editor of The Atlantic, summoned great courage to write about his lifelong struggle with anxiety.
I was amazed after 8 years of psychotherapy that there were components of shame, I feel, in my own experience that were suddenly erased in the reading of this book. When someone of your success level is willing to talk about it, it gives us all permission to let go of that shame.
I mean, it's funny, everyone says you're very brave or courageous, and I feel like, well, it's actually ironic that I'm being called brave for writing a book about how unbrave I am for the most part and how anxious I am.
Although Scott's anxiety disorder and my manic depression are quite different illnesses, he also felt the need to hide it.
You work so hard to maintain this outward veneer of kind of competence and confidence, but that is kind of at odds with the true self. And that, as I say, that's a symptom, but it's a cause because it takes a lot of energy to do that, and you start to become terrified that one sort of parting of the curtains and you reveal, like, actually there's a crazy, vulnerable person in there, like the whole house of cards is going to come crashing down.
So you've been plagued by anxiety since you were very young. Can you tell me a little bit how that first developed?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, when I was a little kid, I didn't know, I didn't know from anxiety, but I knew that I felt really miserable a lot of the time. And this is very kind of textbook for the development of an anxiety disorder, but the first symptoms that I had were acute separation anxiety. And separation anxiety is kind of a normal developmental stage. Kids get homesick for their parents. They have trouble separating when they go off to school. But for me, it was really acute. My mom was in law school when I was in first grade, and my dad was working. And we'd have a babysitter. I'd come home from school, and every single night I would be convinced that they'd like both died in a car crash or had abandoned me. And it was not rational. Like, they were very loving parents, and yet I literally, I had this, horrible orange plaid 1970s wallpaper and a rug that matched it, and I literally wore grooves in the rug because I would every single night. I knew my dad was supposed to be home at 6:30, and like at around 6:10, I'd start to think he's not home yet, and I would walk around in circles, and then I'd sit on the radiator and like listen for, he had a VW, brown VW Rabbit, and I would listen for the car, and I couldn't hear it, and I'd try to like mentally will him home. I would say, I'm picturing the car, turning up onto Clark Street and onto Clover, and then a car would come down, and it wouldn't be his, and I'd be like, oh my God, and then he would come home, and I would just be filled with like euphoria and relief, and be like, he's alive, I haven't been abandoned.
I knew exactly what he was talking about. As it had with me, illness overcame rationality.
When the anxiety is inside of you and you're having a panic attack, it's your own body kind of working against you, which is completely terrifying.
The feelings of terror and hopelessness brought on by mental illness often lead people to feel acutely suicidal. I vividly remember the first time I learned about suicide.
One of the things I keep going back to in my life is this pivotal moment. I think I was about 10 years old, and you had just given me a pink Walkman for Christmas. And one of the first tapes you gave me was Richard Farina.
Richard and Mimi Farina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a song on that, Pack Up Your Sorrows, that touched my heart so deeply at such a young age. And that Christmas, we drove to my grandmother's house in Darien, Connecticut, and I was talking, I don't know how I learned of this, but somehow I found out that the neighbor had killed herself in the garage.
Right, the adults were whispering about it.
They were talking about it, and it had never occurred to me that anyone would ever do that to themselves. Do you remember what you said to me?
I remember it broke my heart to watch your face. Just, that some dreadful thing in the world was entering you somehow.
I remember you saying it's an abyss, don't let it pull you in. And then I remember just looking out the window at the garage for several days during that holiday weekend, just listening to the song and looking out.
But if somehow you could pack up your sorrows and give them all to me.
In that moment, like when I look back at that now, that was the moment where the wish to write a song, the mental health foreshadowing, and in many ways that line, pack up your sorrows and give them all to me, and the idea that you would lose them, I know how to use them. You're taking someone else's pain and turning it into into something better and giving it back to them. And so I feel like that song has just stayed with me this entire time.
You could pack up your sorrows and give them all to me. You would lose them, I know how to use them, give them all to me. You would lose them, I know how to use them, give them all to me.
When I was a kid, I was a classic overachiever. a straight-A student, a star athlete. But when depression hit me at age 19, suddenly it was a struggle to even get up in the morning, to function at all. I was too ashamed to ask for help. This is so common, and attitudes that exist within a family can sometimes make it even more difficult to seek treatment.
And I came from a very, military family, and my father was a pilot, and I mean, it was not the sort of world in which you went around saying, I can't get out of bed. I mean, it wasn't done. You didn't talk about it. Nobody in my family talked about it. Nobody did talk about it.
Why do we feel that need to hide it so much? Is that shame wired into the chemistry of the illness?
I think that there's some part of it that makes a great deal of sense, is that when you're depressed, you have no energy, or you have a very limited amount of energy. If you have to squander your energy on dealing with other people, first of all, you're very likely to get into an argument with somebody else, which is going to make everything worse. And even if you don't get in an argument, you still have to, you need to preserve and protect yourself. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the fact that, people aren't endlessly understanding. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote An Unquiet Mind was because my mother who was, from my point of view, the world's best mother, a deeply wonderful, wonderful, wonderful mother, had no idea what I was experiencing. She was also Miss Normal. She was completely, she never depressed in a day in her life, certainly never manic a day in her life. And she had a daughter and two daughters and a husband who had this illness that was just a complete perplexity to her. There's this kind of notion that people should be shamed into being more understanding than it perhaps is reasonable. I think that it's very, very hard to understand what somebody is experiencing when they're depressed. What you can hope is that people who are close to you will try and learn, and you can hope that you yourself will try and make it easier on them as to the extent that you can when you're sick. But it's not easy.
I've heard you say that the word stigma actually stigmatizes. Mm-hmm. You prefer a word like discrimination.
Right.
Tell me why.
Well, first of all, I do think stigma stigmatizes, because as soon as you say the word stigma, there's an implication that there's something to be stigmatized that you're talking about. I don't like looking at mental illness that way. I like discrimination because it has a nice, healthy, legal quality to it. I mean, we talk about discrimination in so many aspects of the society, and appropriately so. What we don't do is talk about discrimination against a very, very large group of the American public who have mental illness. We don't look at that as discrimination in terms of jobs, in terms of how we talk, in terms of using words like loon and crazy and so forth in public spaces, in newspapers. That these things are, I think, really unforgivable.
The shame and fear around mental illness were as deadly to me as the disease itself. I wanted to understand why this discrimination is so pervasive in our society. So I went to speak with Dr. Nasser Ghami, psychiatrist and director of the Mood Disorders Program at Tufts Medical Center.
People have wanted to see these illnesses as all bad. That's part of the discrimination, the stigma against mental conditions, psychiatric conditions. That's not different at all than racism, sexism, and homophobia.
Right.
And just like with racism, sexism, and homophobia, the view in the past was, well, you don't have to respect blacks or women because they're not as intelligent as men or white people. Well, that was based on false, ignorant knowledge. And it's the same today. The discrimination against psychiatric conditions is based on false, ignorant beliefs, absence of knowledge, when we think of them as all bad. But on the other hand, they're not all good, obviously, either. It's an admixture of good and bad, and that's the nature, really, of the human condition in so many ways.
Dr. Ghami's book, A First-Rate Madness, takes a fresh look at links between political leadership, creativity, and mental illness. He shows the ways in which people who are abnormal, meaning they are outside the average range of behavior, have contributed to society in vital ways.
When you look at human culture and you ask yourself about the individuals that stand out, who've taught or written about ideas that we think have a lot of meaning, they're really abnormal people. There's been research done on professions in mental illness. The profession that's most associated with suicide is poetry. And if you're a very successful poet, it increases your suicide risks.
I think there's no question that one of the things why you see such a disproportionate rate of mood disorders in artists and writers is that you do have this. We ask artists and writers to go to the edge. We ask artists and writers to go out and experience things that are more extreme than we would and bring them back in a form which we can use for our own lives in a meaningful way without having to go through that experience. We ask artists and writers to look at death in a way in which most of us don't want to look at, kind of eye to eye. And sometimes that really requires that people have gone through depression to really see the limits of what they can do.
Many people have a romantic view of artists with depression. It was easy for me to explain away my own moods as part of my artistic temperament. Believe me, there is nothing artistic or romantic about a breakdown.
I won't tell you what I've seen, only that this world can be so mean. Brave souls shuffling up and down the halls. No one visits, no one even calls. Did you wait there too? I've been getting better these days, and I've been sleeping in my own bed again, and I've been dreaming in full color of goodbye sorrow. I found another, oh goodbye, goodbye, oh goodbye.
I wanted to understand the biological basis for these illnesses. I visited my friend Steve McCarroll, a leading Harvard geneticist. Steve had hired me to be a nanny for his newborn son shortly after my breakdown, proving to me that some people could see beyond the stigma. But many people still struggle to understand mental illness.
A friend of mine said, I had a child who had cancer, and I had a child who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And the difference was, with the child who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, no one brought us a casserole. And I felt like that story really showed how much people struggle to even with the best of intentions, to make sense of what's happening in these situations and of what people need.
It seems there's still a real underlying stigma, a sense of it being a character weakness, some kind of moral failure. The self-esteem plummets with the depression for those of us dealing with it, so we also tend to blame ourselves. How can our understanding of the biological basis of these illnesses change that stigma, change that perception?
Well, up until recently, there's been enormous confusion, even among scientists, about whether these disorders were biological and how biological they are. But the important thing to understand is that the brain is an organ. Like every organ, the liver, the kidney, the intestine, it's a complex system of cells and molecules. And sometimes things go awry in that system and need a little help to get back on track. That's true of every other part of the body. It's also true of the brain.
A colleague of Steve's, Evan McCosco, is a psychiatrist doing groundbreaking research. I asked him to explain what is actually happening in the brain during a manic or depressive episode.
So we can see elements of the brain changing when somebody's in a manic episode or they're depressed. We know that, for example, when somebody is severely depressed, the portions of their brain that are responsible for carrying out rational thought and planning different actions, like the prefrontal cortex, are less active. We also know that there are certain chemical changes that occur over time and also certain changes that occur to those circuits over time. And as a result, people sometimes will see the world in a different way.
Through their innovative work, Evan, Steve, and their colleagues are using genetics to reveal the molecular basis of mental illness and to understand how genome variation gives rise to variation in human biology.
So you can think of a genome as a recipe book for all of the big molecules that the cells in a person's body make. And it's a large recipe book. It has tens of thousands of recipes in it. Every one of us has a different recipe book that's a unique combination of all these different recipes that we inherited from our ancestors. And that recipe book works great the vast majority of the time. As we figure out what all those recipes are and how they vary from person to person and which of those variations relates to people's risk of an illness, that's where medication could help, new kinds of medications that could target the expression or the function of specific genes.
So how much of this is nature or nurture?
It's nature and nurture. Our biology shapes how we experience our world. Our experience shapes how our genes are expressed. It all comes together in one complex system, and it's going to be very exciting when we get to the bottom of how it works.
Steve and Evan give me so much hope for the future of treatment. I find their explanations freeing and empowering. Mental illness isn't a weakness in character. It's a disease with a biological basis. It's wired into our genes. Some people have the genes for certain cancers or heart disease. I have the genes for an illness of the brain. This research is giving us a clearer scientific understanding of manic depression. But for too long, mental illness has confused and scared us, as was clearly evident during the 1972 presidential campaign. I wanted to understand how Senator Thomas Eagleton's brief run for the vice presidency was derailed by discrimination. Just a few days after George McGovern nominated him as his running mate, news surfaced that he had received shock treatment for depression. A firestorm erupted. I spoke with Eagleton biographer, Professor James Giglio.
Well, I think, at that time, Americans feared mental illness, particularly when shock treatments were employed, because that suggested that those mental problems were serious. And the concern was that, if he ever became president himself, that Tom Eagleton would be incapable of performing.
For 2 weeks, the media hotly debated whether Eagleton's depression had made him unfit to serve. In the end, this perceived liability caused McGovern to drop him from the ticket. But Senator Eagleton wasn't alone. Dr. Gami's research shows that some of our greatest leaders suffered from depression or bipolar. These illnesses, he argues, actually played an important role in making them so successful. Dr. Gami found that mood disorders can strengthen 4 psychological traits vital to leadership. He found that people with depression or bipolar are often more creative than so-called normal people. They can be more realistic about the world, more resilient, and often develop stronger empathy towards others.
Creativity, I think, was the trait that before I even started looking into it, I already knew about. People have talked about it. It's probably the most well-known. Realism, a lot of people don't know that it's associated with depression, and what people found, surprisingly, when psychologists were looking into people with depression, was that in experimental paradigms where the experimenters would control the outcome of the experiment, and then they would see if the students, usually who were part of the experiment, realized that they didn't have much control over the outcome. Normal people didn't realize they didn't have control over the outcome. They consistently overestimated their control, whereas the mildly depressed students consistently got it right. They realized how much they controlled and how much they didn't. So I think it's a clear association that if you're a little depressed, you understand what's going on around you more clearly than others do. And it's normal actually not to. It's normal to be a little unrealistic, to feel like you have a little more control over your environment than you do.
I think that depressive realism is so important. We would never guess that that would be a great leadership skill. And yet you use the examples of Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And you speak about how because they repeatedly had to overcome their own hardship internally in these inner wars, the black dog that gnawed at Churchill, that when they were faced with, say, you know, the impending doom in Britain in the 40s, that somehow that didn't frighten Churchill as much as it would have someone who hadn't repeatedly overcome those inner battles.
Right.
Why does that not just wear someone down who's a leader?
It's a good question. It gets to the trait of resilience. If some people get worn down, some people don't. They're resilient. And the research on resilience shows that manic symptoms are associated with resilience. The more manic you are, the more resilient you are to traumas and stresses. And this is why I think manic depression is a better illness for these traits than plain old depression. When you're thinking about leadership, that certainly is a key characteristic you want. Somebody who can face a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and a lot of trauma, and handle it.
Dr. Gami's research also shows that depression increases empathy, which in turn creates unexpected powers of leadership. He notes that our brains are actually wired with neurons specifically designed so that we can experience what is happening to someone else.
There's this neuroscience research that you're referring to that shows that these mirror neurons in the brain, which comprise about 10% of the overall brain, are really just there to mirror the experiences of others. So if you're in pain, I'm in pain. If you grimace, I grimace. There's some psychological research that shows there's more empathy in people with depression than not.
So you cite the lives of Gandhi and Martin Luther King as these great examples of empathy, especially lending itself to nonviolence.
In my view, Gandhi and King are the key examples of the importance of these traits because the nonviolent philosophy that they had, in my understanding of it, is best understood as a philosophy of radical empathy for others.
Dr. Gami writes that the depression that both Gandhi and Martin Luther King experienced intensified their empathy for others.
Again, that gets to the issue of how empathy and depression are related. It is interesting what a similarity there is in the basic contours of their lives.
I love this concept of the paradox of trauma that you talk about, and the stealing effect. If the trauma doesn't crush us, it can actually give us this post-traumatic growth.
It seems like if you survive it, there's something good that can go out of that, especially the ability then to survive future traumas. So in a way, one way of thinking about this kind of leadership is to be looking for people who've had these tough life experiences.
But of course, they're so often hiding it.
They won't talk about it. It gets to people like Thomas Eagleton, who was a senator who had severe depression and got electroconvulsive treatment. That was a rationale to take him off the ticket for the presidency in 1972 as the vice presidential nominee. But I would look at it as a good reason to be on a ticket. Eagleton went on to have a very successful career for another 20 years. There was no evidence before or afterwards that it would have been a problem. But it's an example, a classic example of how stigma against psychiatric conditions, this discrimination plays out in our culture, like in our politics.
I was 28 when manic depression made me acutely suicidal. But I had been quietly coping with depression since I was a teenager. Like so many young people who experience depression, I didn't understand the symptoms. Adolescence is a time of dramatic change, and the symptoms can easily be misinterpreted. Mental illness can make anyone, especially teenagers, vulnerable to suicide.
These seem to be illnesses of young people and just strike so in such a surprising and startling way that if we can get to them right at that beginning, that's going to change that whole course for them.
That's right. That's right. And many of these illnesses strike people as they transition from late adolescence to early adulthood. And they may be connected to developmental biology into the ways in which our brain is changing when we're teenagers. That's going to be very important to understand. There are all kinds of changes going on, not just lots of hormones, but real sculpting and remodeling of circuits in the teenage brain. And it may be that as we understand the key cellular and molecular events in these disorders, that they're going to turn out to be very strongly connected to things that are just happening naturally in all of us during those years in our life.
Understanding why mental illness affects so many during adolescence is an important piece of the puzzle. But to do something about it, to help people who are suffering, we have to talk about it openly and honestly. For me, the mental anguish and shame were so extreme that I was desperate to escape the pain. All I thought about was dying. Dr. Jameson understood this extreme suffering. I asked her to recount her suicide attempt.
It was about 3 months after I became an assistant professor at UCLA. I got wildly manic. I mean, psychotically manic, delusional, hallucinating, just completely out of control. And then hit the rocks after that. There were people around me who got me to a doctor. And I responded extremely well to lithium. And then I responded so well that I did what a lot of people do. I thought, I don't need this anymore. So I stopped taking my lithium, and then I got manic again, and then I got very severely depressed. And that's when I attempted suicide. And yes, I did know. I knew what the treatment options were. I knew the illness. I was studying it. I was writing about it. I should have known, but it's not like you're at your intellectual best when you're suicidally depressed. It just isn't, and I think one of the things that is frightening to an extreme about depression is how much it affects your ability to think. I felt like, if I'm going to be like this the rest of my life, I can't think, and I can't love, and I can't act, I can't do all those things that are most important to me in life. What's the point?
And when you decided to finally end it, you were very methodical. You weren't crying for help. You wanted out.
Right.
How did you survive, and what's kept you alive in all the years since?
I was a lithium researcher, and I took way, way over the amount that I knew was lethal, and placated all those people in my keepers, friends and colleagues who were sort of keeping quasi-semi-watch on me, and I timed it and did it. My brother called from Paris, and it never occurred to me that you do things when you're unconscious or just about unconscious that you wouldn't do conscious. I would no more have answered the phone than flown, but I was completely gorked by that time. And I picked up the phone, and my brother heard my very, very slurred voice, called my doctor, and so forth. So in this case, I was very, very lucky. It took me a long time to get well, but I have not missed a day of lithium since. It's just, it was clear to me I was going to die or live. Right. And if I was going to live, I could just keep taking my medication.
Until you experience this feeling of being suicidal, it's impossible to understand. I was in agony. It was like being trapped in a burning building. After my first hospitalization, I returned to my mom's house. The medications weren't helping yet. Nothing made sense anymore. My body was catatonically depressed, but my brain was on fire. It had been weeks since I'd slept. One afternoon, I was alone for a few minutes. When we were kids, Mom had told us stories about there being quicksand in the pond behind the house. In a total break from reality, I ran straight out through the backwoods into the water, believing I would drown. There was no quicksand. I returned to the house to find the entire family searching for me. They drove me back to the hospital, but when I refused to sign the papers, my sister Tess had me committed. At first, being forced back into the hospital felt like a betrayal. But I quickly realized it was about protecting me. She saved my life when I couldn't save my own life anymore. The hospital is a place to stay safe. If you have a life-threatening illness of any kind, you need to go to the hospital. It's time we got over that stigma.
I think the most difficult clinical issue is trying to get people into treatment who don't feel that they need to be in treatment, or when you're depressed, you don't feel like there's any point. You may know intellectually that there are, a series of things that might work in terms of treatment, but when you get depressed, you think, it won't work for me. It's just the nature of the beast.
It took nearly 6 weeks before the medications began to give me some relief. I found this process of trial and error very unsettling. I was shocked that doctors could transplant hearts but couldn't get me to sleep. In the many years since my breakdown, medication has been highly effective and vital to my health and stability. But the use of psychiatric medications can be a loaded topic.
I wondered if you could address this ambivalence that we have about medication. For those of us who need it, it's a lifeline, and yet still there's this huge public perception that, it's a weakness, it's something we should hide.
I, could not have gotten through middle school without medication. I could not have gotten through my book tour without medication. I find that certain medications at certain times for me are incredibly effective. There are these two strains in theories of psychopharmacology. On the one hand, you have people who are sort of critics of cosmetic psychopharmacology, which is just, in their view, people are just taking it to get better than well. On the other hand, there's pharmacological Calvinism, which is this idea that you should just, suffering is good for you, pills are not necessary, and there's poll data that suggests that, even as more and more of us are taking psychiatric medications of various kinds, there's still an innate instinctive stigmatization of it and feeling like that this is evidence of weakness and somehow, weak moral fiber or something like that. So.
And yet those of us who've had the courage to actually take it realize that that's a great sign of strength.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, for me to almost get killed for not taking medication for those 9 years, that to me now looks like the weakness.
Evan McCosco confirmed what Scott and I have both experienced firsthand. There is still more guesswork than knowledge.
I've been on medication for the last 8 years, and I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about what the anti-seizure drugs or drugs like lithium are actually doing to stabilize the brain.
I wish we really could explain exactly how these medications change the brain and improve it so that you don't end up having a manic episode or a depressive episode. But we, as scientists and as clinicians, don't have the knowledge to actually provide that kind of detailed explanation. A lot of these medications were stumbled upon. The truth is, we don't understand which aspects of those drugs actually help people.
Despite this lack of knowledge, these drugs work for so many people. And the fact that drugs work makes it clear that these illnesses have a biological basis.
You cannot separate the body and the mind. You cannot separate biology from psychology or spirituality even. So you can have a physical disease like manic depression. You should take a medication that's proven effective for it, like lithium. If nature makes a certain part of your body sick and you have proof that you can make it better with something, then do it. That makes sense.
The medications that are available today are based on molecular mechanisms that were discovered by chance 50 years ago.
Which is not very comforting.
It's not the way we develop drugs today in any other area of medicine. So in cancer, for example, genetic discoveries in cancer 30 years ago put cancer research on a path to the really amazing place where we are today. There are so many new cancer drugs that are available today that weren't available when we were kids. And we're surrounded by people who have been cured of cancers that had a very different outcome 30 years ago. That's the kind of future we need to create for patients with these illnesses.
the sad remains of this wild, wild world that was never ours, that somehow we had the need to claim nothing but the wind and sky, and this impulse to survive. But when dark falls behind windows, see these tired eyes bathed in blue light. Watch the world turn, watch the heart find. Comfort alone won't keep us alive. Dreamt last night of your Irish eyes, of your teeth shining in the dark when you smile, of your solitude and your even keel, of your steady gait. Hospitalization had kept me alive, medications were stabilizing my brain, and ongoing talk therapy and psychiatric care were supporting my recovery. Now I was ready to make some bigger changes in my life. I spoke with my dad about the romantic writers of the 19th century. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Herman Melville helped shape the American literary tradition. In their work, they reflected on themes that I was now contemplating. How to slow down, how to find meaning in my life and in the world.
Thoreau's the great advocate of simplifying things, and
Right.
you know, and you're wealthy in proportion to the things that you can let alone, or that you can take
Right.
leave of, and you can let go. And so, I mean, what's the real inner wealth? How do we nourish the inner person in the midst of a consumeristic, materialistic kind of culture? I mean, this is a huge age of technological and material progress in America, and a lot of the transcendentalists were saying, but wait a second, you know, what else is important? What do we need? You know, what does the human being need to be fully human?
My father also spoke of the character of Ishmael in the novel Moby Dick, written by Herman Melville. Ishmael is one of the most important characters in American literature, and he too suffers from depression. When Ishmael is feeling suicidal, he goes to sea on a whaling ship. He calls it my substitute for pistol and ball. During the voyage, he confronts the natural world in all of its beauty and terror. The journey transforms him.
And that was a huge thing in transcendentalism, that correspondence between the inner world and the outer world. And I really think Ishmael in Moby Dick is somebody who comes to an awareness of that sense of companionship with the world, and
Right.
and that sense that it's not just his quest that's important, but that he belongs to something larger, you know, and that you take this on in a way. It's part of being human, is taking on some parts of the world and learning how to carry.
Now, he was in pretty rough shape right before he
Yeah, I know.
set out
Yeah,
of the
I know.
boat.
He was in.
He
You know,
was-
he describes himself as being in, you know, a similar state of mind to, you know, what you've described. That somehow going to sea, launching out into the unknown, but with this idea of questing for something, you know, mysterious and really beyond his ability to fathom, in a way. And he survives. He's the only one who survives. And in part, I think he survives because he's learned how to love. He's learned how to love the world. And I think in some ways that he comes back to tell us that story, you know, it is a kind of record of that transformation that he's undergone. So, I mean, it's a different way. I mean, he launches out into the vast ocean, you know. Thoreau retreats from Concord and goes to his little body of water. What is it about water and transformative experiences?
Water has always held tremendous power in my life as well. Water was where I wanted to go to die. Later, the sea became a turning point for my healing. After my foiled suicide attempt in the pond, I was hospitalized for 9 days, released for a week, and then checked myself back in for 9 more days. Then I attended a day program for several more weeks. When the program ended, I was still depressed and extremely anxious. At a loss for options, Tess took me on a whale watch off the coast of Cape Cod, like we had done so many summers as young kids. The medications had reached a good level. The timing was right.
So why did you decide that taking me out to see the whales, like, what made you think that that was the right thing to do?
I'd been preparing for your death all summer, so I thought we've exhausted all our options. So it was, in a way, it was a last hurrah for me. It was like, I need to go and I need to visit these places with you, and then if I still can't keep you, then I'm gonna let you go. But let's just go here. Let's go on this pilgrimage and do things that used to make us happy and see what happens.
What was so beautiful that day that I wasn't expecting was that all of a sudden I could start to feel again. And it was weird because I'd been craving the ocean as a place to die. And we came out here and instead the ocean just woke something up again in me. And I remember, like, I just couldn't believe that I could feel the sunlight again and I could feel, like, I mean, that was a pretty amazing whale night, right?
I think it was the best one we ever went on.
They were just like jumping up and breaching and slapping the water, and they were playing with us.
On that same visit to Cape Cod, Tess did something else, both remarkable and commonplace. She just took me swimming.
But it was such a relief because everyone was trying so hard, and you stopped trying to fix me and you just said, let's just be here and let's see what happens. And you're right, I was able to feel the life in it, not the death in it.
Madness sings a siren song. The sea calls me, but I don't swim on. Let the old year be behind me. What's the harm in being happy?
Since that summer, swimming has played an important role in my recovery, and Walden Pond is the best place to swim near my house. I'm amazed to find that this same pond that was so important to my father, a place synonymous with getting back to nature, has become a place of deep healing for me as well. Years before I was suicidal, I read an article in the New Yorker about suicide in the Golden Gate Bridge. The story featured a California highway patrolman named Kevin Briggs, who had saved hundreds of people from jumping to their deaths. In the article, Briggs said he asked these people a few simple questions. How are you feeling? What are your plans for tomorrow? And then he listened. He listened for as long as it took, sometimes standing up there for 7 hours in the wind and fog. The story of his compassion touched me so deeply. Although I didn't yet know that I was living with bipolar, I wrote a song called Gatekeeper and dedicated it to Kevin Briggs. Then, 6 years after my breakdown, I received an email out of the blue from Sergeant Briggs, which began a correspondence which has lasted to this day. That power of human compassion was on my mind as I flew to California to finally meet Sergeant Kevin Briggs. As I walked across the bridge that day, I thought about all that had happened in the years since I'd first written his song. I felt so lucky and so grateful to be alive.
Hi, Meg.
Good to meet you.
I've been waiting a long time to meet you.
I've been waiting 11 years. Oh, thank you.
It's so good to finally meet you.
I never knew that when I wrote that song, I hoped that it might save somebody's life, but
It's been impactful on my life.
I never knew it might be my own life that it would.
I have so many people write to me about that song.
At the deepest moment of my despair, I found myself
hearing your words. How are you feeling? What are your plans for tomorrow? And those words served as a gatekeeper to me. It was almost like you were standing on that bridge next to me.
When the days grow too long, the hours standing still, and you wonder if you could, if you will. With your toes upon the edge, with your eyes upon the sky, tell me just these things before you fly. How are you feeling? What are your plans for tomorrow? Will you let me make some? And after, you can do as you will.
How have those questions come up in your work? How did those end up being the powerful questions?
I have found that when I approach someone, instead of ordering them, being very directive and decisive as most cops are taught and trained, I tried to just go with a different approach. How are you today? How are you feeling? What's going on in your life? Give them my full attention and then ask them, do you have any plans for tomorrow?
You can make it through today if you dare.
It takes a lot of courage to come back over that rail and to face all these issues again. But people can do it, and they can get better. There's a lot of help, so much help out there. We just need to find the right stuff.
We have to be honest in discussing suicide. It's a difficult topic, but talking about it does not inspire more suicide. It prevents it.
So one of the things that I feel is so important is that we don't glamorize what actually happens here. And I feel like while we're standing next to the bridge, I want to talk about the reality of it.
It's around 220 feet, that fall. When someone lets go, you fall for 4 to 5 seconds, and you hit that water at about 75 miles an hour. It's a hell of an impact. Most people die on impact. And if they don't, then they wind up suffering, and they break lots of bones in their body, internal bones, which then puncture the vital organs. If they're lucky enough to survive that fall, then they'll flail in the water and drown. It's a horrible way to go.
And the few people that have survived, I've heard them say the minute they let go, they knew that everything else was fixable. They'd give anything to get back over the railing.
Absolutely.
And is it true that the majority of the people who climb back over that railing go on to live healthy, whole lives and get treatment and get help?
Absolutely.
What advice do you have for someone who's trying to talk to someone who's struggling, who's feeling suicidal? What's the best thing they can do for a friend or loved one?
Just listen. Don't argue or blame or tell them how you feel or your experiences. Listen to them. Really listen. Try to put yourself in their shoes. It's difficult. But listen to them. Let them talk. Let them vent.
How are you feeling?
3 years into my recovery, I found myself ready for more than just stability. I was ready for health. The illness had opened a door in my life. Now I needed to walk through it. I had been passing a Tibetan monk on a path near my house for many years. One day I finally met him, and it changed my life. He is Lama Migmar, Harvard Buddhist chaplain and spiritual director at the Sakya Institute for Buddhist Studies. I began to study meditation at his center in
I needed to suffer, to truly acknowledge suffering or understand it in my life before I would really be ready to meet my teacher. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how suffering allows us to truly begin a spiritual practice.
I think when we have mental suffering or physical pain, then we wanted to seek some help. So we go to doctor, we go to teachers, and try to see, why we are suffering. So we try to diagnose. Same way, in a spiritual way, we also try to find what are the causes of all our mental sufferings, sicknesses. So according to those causes, conditions, which is making you sick, then we have to prescribe medicine. So spiritually, we prescribe spiritual medicine, and then medicine is something you have to integrate in your life.
At first, meditation was really uncomfortable, both physically and mentally. But as I practiced and studied, I started to feel changes. My brain grew quieter. My thoughts slowed down. I was less anxious. I began to sleep well, and even my dreams felt more peaceful. Within a year, I was able to reduce my medications significantly. I even wondered if I was now well enough to stop my medication altogether. Under my doctor's wary supervision, I reduced the medication even more. But within months, the depression returned, and my brain got cloudy again.
What Buddhism is saying is the nature of the mind is pure. The nature of the mind is pure, right? And circumstantially, then due to all these emotions, then we are sick. We are sick. See? So the nature of the space is pure, but clouds come and go. Once you have that discovery, then, as you say, that by nature, we are free.
It was never taken away, it was obscured.
Yes. Only when you know that sky is clear and pure. If you live within the cloud, then you may think, cloud is sky.
In time, I found the right balance between medication and meditation, which was helping me heal on a much deeper level and changing my whole perspective on illness. I was curious to find out what neuroscience could tell us about the effects of mindfulness and meditation on the brain. I traveled to Wisconsin to visit renowned neuroscientist and researcher Dr. Richard Davidson at his Center for Investigating Healthy Minds. I knew he had observed both structural and functional changes in the brains of meditators. It was empowering to learn that there's scientific evidence that we can make permanent physical changes to our brains.
Our brains are much, much more dynamically changing structurally than any of us previously thought. There are findings in the research literature that indicate that an hour and a half of video game playing can change the structure of your brain. And so there's every reason to think that 7 hours of meditation will change the structure of your brain too.
Davidson and his colleagues looked at functional MRIs and EEGs of experienced meditators and noted remarkable and lasting differences in regions of the brain related to attention, resilience, and compassion. They also conducted brief training sessions for people who had no prior experience meditating and observed changes in regions of the brain corresponding with decreased stress and increased focus and altruism.
Now, in the last couple of years, where we've tested the impact of much shorter periods of practice. In every case that we've studied, we have found systematic changes in the brain. And those changes in the brain have been associated with important changes in behavior that also shift from before to after the training. So these data clearly show that even small amounts of practice can make a real difference. And if we can show that the regular engagement in these kinds of practices decreases a person's healthcare utilization, decreases their prescription drug costs, then every organization on the globe is going to want a part of this. And I think that that will happen. And I think that once that happens, we will cross the tipping point.
My journey has taken me a long way. My breakdown nearly killed me, but it also served as a breakthrough that started me on a path towards deeper health and happiness. Meditation and mindfulness-based practices have the power to alleviate so much suffering. I started wondering, how can we give these tools to more young people? I learned of an innovative program doing just that. In San Francisco, Quiet Time teaches meditation to students at Burton High School, an inner-city school so tough it was known as a fight school.
Quiet Time is a school-wide activity that all students participate in. Then within that Quiet Time class period, students have a choice to either practice meditation or do other quiet activities. You can never really require anyone to meditate. It's something that you have to want to do, or else there's no point in doing it.
So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit the statistics, the actual numbers that you're seeing that are being changed by the Quiet Time program.
What we found was that there was a statistically significant improvement in standardized test scores, in attendance, and on some of the softer measures, actually the students reported a significant reduction in anger and fatigue, which I think are two very important measures. I think those are two big enemies of learning. You know, it's hard to learn when you're angry and tired.
Quiet Time isn't the only program helping kids be more mindful. Dr. Davidson has developed several groundbreaking mindfulness programs in elementary schools.
As you know, an important kind of meditation practice that's taught in the contemplative traditions is a practice or a set of practices that are designed to cultivate compassion, which is the wish that to relieve suffering in others. And we've published evidence to show that after just short-term compassion training, people actually behave more altruistically.
So these findings have huge impact on how we raise children, how we can influence them in schools. Now you're running a few pilot programs in the Madison area, kindness curriculum with kindergarten age children and a mindfulness program with fifth graders. How are you managing to do this, and what are you finding among these students?
They've loved it. That is, the public school system has loved it because it actually has been found on a number of our objective measures to lead to significant gains in certain kinds of attention and social and emotional behavior. And so there is increased recognition among educators that these so-called non-cognitive factors, social and emotional skills, are really significant and probably play a more important role in determining life success than how you score on your SATs or your grade point average.
It seems that we owe it to children as much as we owe them good nutrition or literacy to give them this mental, emotional literacy. Do you think there'll be a lot of resistance in the country as you try to move this to a wider audience? It seems like we owe it to our children.
I completely agree with you. I think if we do this skillfully and we adhere rigorously to evidence-based approaches, I think that we can really push the envelope, and that is exactly what we're trying to do.
As our society becomes more accepting of those who are considered different, we will be able to help so many more people receive proper treatment and hopefully devote more resources to educating young people. We're spending billions of dollars on
you know, medical care for self-inflicted injuries. Why aren't we spending $1 billion on prevention? Why are we so scared to talk to kids?
Well, you got me. I mean, I don't understand it. I never have understood the priorities in the system. I can only say that it's better than it was. But I think one of the things that's very frustrating is that, you know, I mean, I and many of my colleagues will get called into a high school after somebody's committed suicide. And, you know, you go and you talk about suicide and depression and all those kinds of things. It's a good thing to do, but it should have, you know, you'd like to have it done earlier. Because one of the most terrifying things is it comes to you out of the blue, as you said. And if you have some recognition that this is something that has been described as treatable, and these are some of the symptoms, it's perhaps not so devastating when it happens.
Johns Hopkins has developed the Adolescent Depression Awareness Program that educates students, teachers, and parents on how to recognize symptoms of mood disorders and how to seek help early on. I believe that another vital way we can reach people is through the arts.
Evening light on a gravel path. Could be scared, but I've had enough of that old big old.
I've really been thinking a lot, and somehow this ties into you as well. I think the role of the artist, I think it's the artist who has a role to play. The artists I really admire are those who somehow help us see the world more clearly in a way. And by seeing the world more clearly, I mean, this is the Buddhist thing, we begin to see ourselves more clearly.
I feel that the whole role of the artist is to keep braving that deep inner work of transformation. You know, I asked Lama Migmar, my teacher, what do you think the right use of creativity is? And he said, if you're using it to transform yourself, then it's the right use. And through that transformation, the hope is that you're actually striking a chord in someone else.
All of my conversations renewed my belief that things can change. I've felt these changes so powerfully in my own life. Recovery is daily work. I still have lows. I still have times of exuberance, but they're manageable now. I pay attention. I take my medication. I go to therapy and yoga. I sit still every day and breathe. These have been the most productive and creative years of my life. We can't get rid of these illnesses of the brain, at least not yet. But I wholeheartedly believe that we can get rid of the fear, the shame, and the discrimination. I know we can save more lives. We can only do this one person at a time, one day at a time, one conversation at a time.
If you look at the history of medicine where stigma existed with epilepsy, with cancer, with AIDS, the stigma started turning around when those disorders, illnesses were treatable.
At a certain point, the whole thing is going to shift and the culture is going to change. And it's like physical exercise. Today, most middle-class people, the vast majority, will certainly believe that physical exercise is good for your health. Mental exercise is going to be the same way.
Is biology destiny when it comes to these illnesses?
We have the genes that we were born with, and we didn't have any choice in that matter. We can continue to actually change our brains through medication or mindfulness meditation or just through life experience. So in the end, the answer is no, biology is not destiny.
In science, it's been hard to predict when the big breakthroughs will happen. I don't know whether the results of this will be cures or treatments of symptoms or something in between. I think we can be so hopeful that the set of options that are available to patients will expand, and not just expand by a little, expand by a lot.
Maybe every day in ordinary ways we hold each other on, keep each other here.
And I heard someone recently say, you know, the equivalent of a jet full of people
are dying every day by suicide in this country. If a jet was going down every day, we'd ground all aircraft.
Absolutely.
And yet we're not addressing an epidemic we're easily excusing it if that's happening to someone that's not like me. It took me being there as a kid from a happy childhood with a beautiful family, with everything going for me to go, oh, this really can happen to any one of us.
It takes, even before coming up here, so much courage to raise your hand and say, I have a problem.
How can we help them raise their hand before they get to that moment where, it takes...
We start talking. We have classes in the schools. That's big. Let them know. I would much rather have that conversation than lose a child.
The science is progressing. Medications will be so much more precise and effective in the years ahead. But we can never forget the most important treatment. There is a medicine as old as humanity. It's human kindness and compassion.
No use crying, talking to a stranger, naming the sorrow you see.
All over the country, I meet people who have turned their own suffering or grief into a force for positive change. They are telling their stories, but most importantly, they are listening. They are using their sorrows to transform the world.
But if somehow you could pack up your sorrows and give them all to me, you would lose them. I know how to use them. Give them all to me. No use rambling, dreaming in the darkness, seeking out a satisfied mind. Too many wrong times, too many long times. Nobody's walking behind. But if somehow you could pack up your sorrows, give them all to me, you would lose them. I know how to use them. Give them all to me. You would lose them. I know how to use them. Give them all to me. But if somehow you could pack up your sorrows and give them all to me, you would lose them. I know how to use them. Give them all to me. Give them all to me. Give them all.